Hello everyone, once again I'm back to provide some more information which intends to somehow cover the questions and doubts you have gained through the exercise of delivering the project as the second partial grade product that we have been working for some weeks. You know that I have decided to provide in this session some further explanations about how does the project look like at those last stages of construction. And since some of you have asked me to develop some sessions for feedback on the conclusions and the pedagogical implications, what I've decided is to design this short clip which intends to provide a very detailed explanation on what you require as the final steps to construct that product. So follow me as I go along some very brief explanations that I'm sure will give you all of the guidelines to construct that final part. So let's begin. Let me walk you through each of the sections that we are going to cover so that you understand those last two parts of the project which you have been constructing. So, in order to write the final section, we need to begin with the very first part, which is called the conclusions. What is a conclusion section? This section intends to provide the results or outcomes of what you have analyzed and condense everything as clear as possible so the reader understands what is or how was the final product after developing or carrying out the analysis. What I'm going to do is to provide you some criteria that will help you get the real notions of what I'm asking for in the conclusion section. So, one of the first aspects we need to take into account is that the conclusions must connect all of the different elocutionary acts as a whole. That means that once you finish analyzing and constructing the elocutionary acts, you need to join them together and see what are the repetitive patterns that you see in each of those interpretations. The second thing you've got to have in mind is that the objectives are addressed and cleared out. When you write the conclusions, all of the conclusions should address the objectives too. That's why you created the project, and the conclusions reveal the final outcome of the whole intervention. And lastly, that the voice and the opinions of you as the authors must be evident in that section. Those should be probably a thesis or a statement that you deliver by the end of the results of the whole project. It is probably one of the last sections in which you are capable of explaining your point, providing your viewpoint, and not sticking very rigidly to what you identified in the locutionary act. Allow me to give you some examples. Here is a work designed and created by Salome, Antonia, and Paulo, who've been working through an analysis of Billie Eilish ethos based on the performance video song When the Party's Over. Notice please that they have designed three objectives. The first objective is to analyze the ethos of Billie Eilish in the video When the Party's Over, transmitted through her corporal language, the gestures, and the clothing. Notice they haven't promised to construct an analysis on the lyrics or the music, but based on the corporal language, the gestures, and the clothing. Later on, they talk about analyzing the ethos construction of Billie Eilish as an influence in pre-adolescence. And lastly, they decided to analyze how a black liquid, which is contrasted in this scenario, transmit the main message of the video. So they have already defined that there is a focus on a black liquid which is represented on the video. So in this sample, Notice they have already designed all of this section, which is understood as the locutionary act, and this section, which is understood as the elocutionary act. In here, notice the expressions they use. We can observe, because we interpret it. All of this information does entail a relation about something that is as it is in the text, and this which is interpreting or creating a stronger notion about what's evident here. Notice they have already defined, want to analyze this aspect, and they want to analyze the person as the whole part of this scenario in which she is being part of in the video. So what they have done is that they've built already a section called the conclusions, and in this section there is a construction of their interpretation or the outcomes. Remember that my suggestion was first read all of the different elocutionary acts, all those interpretations, and then you start the construction of the conclusions. You will have these slides which include all of this description of the conclusions, so you can take a closer look at the construction they have made, so that you understand what are probably the most important sections of it. What I want to portray with this conclusion that they have created is that a conclusion section shouldn't be too extensive. You might construct a conclusion section for, say, 3-4 paragraphs at most, which need to have in mind all of the criteria that was already presented, but also to have in mind that each of those sections must relate to the objectives and must relate to the main intention, which was, of course, presented at the beginning or the title of the project. Now, let's move to the pedagogical implications. What are the pedagogical implications? This section focuses specifically on providing recommendations to teachers, to your partners, or yourself, so that you can implement what you have learned from the analysis about the students who will be in your classroom or the contemporary students who are now in the classrooms. So pedagogical implications in terms of criteria will suggest some considerations to include in the discussion around teaching and education to all the upcoming and contemporary generations of students. Remember that your main goal is to provide recommendations for teachers to implement some alternatives and probably some things that should be considered when teaching those contemporary generations. Another aspect is that there should be a connection between the results and the suggestions for the teachers. There's always the need to have coherence between what you mention in the results, what you mention in the conclusions, and how these will provide some ideas for teachers to implement inside their classrooms. And lastly, the section must reveal some understanding of how the contemporary narratives work, whether you analyze a YouTuber, a video, a song, or any other thing that is contemporary, and how that affects the students' discourses and their educational practices. Remember that what you have to do for this last part, it's free narrative. There is no structure. You may write 1 paragraph or 6 paragraphs, so you really define how extensive it is. But mainly, what you have to do is to provide some ideas and strong recommendations for teachers, since that's your profile and that's what we are intending to do. We analyze all of those narratives, we try to infer what they mean, we make some interpretations, and now we recommend to teachers around the world how could they use what the students have been learning, studying, listening and consuming as discourses, and from here on you think about pedagogical strategies which could be implemented in. Remember that if you happen to have a question, you just message me and probably I could provide you some ideas and recommendations. it's most likely I won't go through all of the different projects before you deliver the second partial test, but following this recommendation surely will give you some ideas on how to construct those last two parts. Let's just recap. First part, it's essential that you have in mind that when you're constructing the conclusions, they should be strictly linked to the title, they should be strictly linked to the objectives, and they should have some of those criteria which I've already projected to you. But also have in mind this, when you are constructing the conclusions, the title which you are presenting must be reflected in there. For instance, in the example I just gave you, they were searching for Billie Eilish ethos, and they came up that she is the representation of sadness. She mirrors sadness, projects sadness, and that's the ethos or the image that is somehow created. Through the analysis they made, they came up with that conclusion, which is completely valid as part of discourse analysis and interpretation. And now they're going to move to that part, which is the pedagogical implications, in which they will suggest how to deal with that conception of sadness, which is portray and mirror through all the teenagers and students, and how could we take advantage of such matters in order to study, provide a session, guide a class, whatever you've got in mind as a pedagogical strategy could be recommended by the end. All of those ideas, creative, innovative as they are, should be presented by the end of a project. So I guess this was clear. It was very short, but not superficial. I wanted to really pinpoint on the aspects that were somehow confusing and give you some instructions for that last part, which is quite a free type of writing, but it should be very creative. You need to talk to your groups. You need to hold very long conversations about what you will write inside of it, and then you project that final product. I hope this was very clear. I'll see you later or connect to you through this medium or the other which we've been using through Google Meet. Bye-bye.